Forget everything you've been told about the end of days. What if I told you that Armageddon isn't a prophecy of the future, but a recurring glitch in history that has already happened 20 times in the exact same spot? As you watch this, there is a point on the map of Israel where reality itself seems to buckle under the weight of thousands of corpses. Megiddo isn't just a hill, it's a hard drive of past apocalypses, a graveyard of dead worlds waiting for the next command to reboot. Archaeologists have uncovered a disturbing pattern, a physical countdown hidden within the ruins that tells us exactly when the next reset began. Napoleon Bonaparte stood on this ridge and felt a chill that history cannot explain. If you stay until the end, I'll show you the physical evidence that Armageddon isn't coming. It never left. It's just waiting for its signal. Science tries to stay rational by calling Megiddo a tell, but the truth is far more sinister. Imagine a lasagna made of concrete, bone, and ash. We are talking about 20 layers of civilizations that all believed they would rule forever, right until the ground of Megiddo swallowed them whole. When you walk across the summit of this mound, you are literally stepping on the heads of kings who died 5,000 years ago. 50 meters beneath your boots, limestone is fused with the bronze of ancient swords and the iron of modern tanks. It is a nightmare geology where every inch of elevation represents a century of carnage that ended in a fire so hot it literally cooked the stones. Megiddo is the only place on Earth where the past isn't buried. It's compacted, serving as the foundation for our own world, which, according to the strata, is merely the next layer of debris waiting to be formed. But why does everyone choose to die right here? The secret lies in the geographic engineering of the Jezreel Valley. Megiddo guards the choke point of death, the narrow Wadi Ara Pass. Imagine a natural funnel where every empire in history, from Thutmose III's Egypt to Napoleon's France, was forced to squeeze through to reach the seat of power. Whoever controls this mound holds the jugular of world trade, the Via Maris. But the Hebrew name Har Megiddo transmuted over the centuries into something far darker, Armageddon. The dread this word causes isn't just religious, it's instinctive. The ancients realized that when Megiddo fell, the domino effect toppled nations thousands of miles away. Armageddon is, in reality, a system error in human geopolitics that always ends in blood. And the terrifying part? We are still using the same routes that led every one of them to extinction. To understand the brutal energy of this place, we have to descend to the layer of 3000 BC. Long before the pyramids, Megiddo was already operating a structure that looks like something out of a horror movie. The Great Temple. It was 10 times larger than any building of its era, a stone monolith designed for one single function: the industrial processing of sacrifice. Parallel walls 13 feet thick hid a sanctuary where the air was so thick it was impossible to breathe. The scent wasn't incense. It was the metallic stench of fresh blood and the smoke of charred flesh that rose day and night to gods who never seemed satisfied. This wasn't a place of prayer. It was a factory of fear. The Great Temple was humanity's first attempt to use institutionalized violence to control fate, turning faith into a gear of power and death. What archaeologists found in the basements of this temple defies modern sensitivity. They discovered corridors called favicii, ritual pits, that were stuffed hip-deep with bones. Thousands of animals, 80% of them young sheep and goats. Imagine the sound, the desperate bleating of hundreds of animals being led through the dark, the rhythmic thud of flint blades meeting throats, and the steam rising from the blood that drained through stone channels into the soil. Megiddo was born as a theocratic machine. The power of its rulers didn't come from beautiful speeches, but from the public demonstration that they could turn life into sacred waste. Blood was the currency, and the people got the message. On this hill, the only way to survive is to be the executioner, never the victim. But fate has an ironic sense of humor for those who think they are the masters of sacrifice. Despite all the brutality, Megiddo was the center of global luxury. Between the layers of bone, archaeologists found exquisite gold jewelry and ivory carvings so delicate they would shame modern craftsmen. It was the jewel of the Via Maris. But at Megiddo, luxury is merely the fuel for the next fire. The stratigraphic record reveals a cruel truth. Between every period of obscene wealth, there is a horizontal black band of ash. Fires so violent that the stones of the city walls literally melted. Every magnificent palace was built over the grave of an elite who thought Armageddon was just a story told to scare children. This cycle of wealth and annihilation is Megiddo's signature. And while the kings drank from gold cups, on the horizon, the thunder of Pharaoh Thutmose III's chariots already announced that the bill for the next sacrifice had arrived, and the price would be the end of an era. By 1457 BC, Megiddo wasn't just a city. It was the nerve center of a massive rebellion against the Egyptian Empire. A coalition of Canaanite kings had fortified the mound, thinking they were untouchable. Enter Pharaoh Thutmose III, the Napoleon of Egypt. He arrived at the edge of the Carmel Ridge with a massive army and a problem that would define military history. There were 3 ways to reach Megiddo. 2 were wide, safe, and predictable. The third was the Aruna Pass, a path so narrow that soldiers would have to march in single file and horses would have to be led by hand. His generals were terrified. They begged him not to take the narrow path, fearing a slaughter in the dark. But Thutmose understood a principle that modern special forces live by today. Surprise is the ultimate multiplier. He looked at his shaking commanders and chose the path of certain death to achieve an impossible victory. Imagine the tension as the Egyptian war machine entered that mountain crack. The sound of thousands of bronze-clad boots scraping against limestone walls, echoing like a rhythmic heartbeat in the claustrophobic silence. This was the first documented blitzkrieg in human history. Thutmose himself led the vanguard, his golden chariot dismantled and carried on the backs of men. One mistake, one Canaanite scout at the top of the ridge, and the entire Egyptian army would have been turned into a mountain of meat. But the gamble paid off. When the Egyptians emerged from the pass like a golden swarm under the midday sun, the Canaanite kings, who were expecting an attack from the wide northern plains, realized they were already dead. The Napoleon of Egypt had bypassed their entire defense system in a single night. The panic was so absolute that the rebels fled, leaving their chariots of gold and silver behind in the dust. But the victory wasn't total. In their rush to loot the abandoned Canaanite treasures, the Egyptian soldiers allowed the rebel kings to scramble back inside the massive walls of Megiddo. Thutmose was furious. What should have been a one-day knockout turned into a grueling 7-month siege. He ordered his men to build a wooden palisade around the entire city, effectively cutting off the choke point of death from the rest of the world. Inside, the luxury we discussed earlier became a curse. The gold jewelry and ivory carvings couldn't be eaten. As the weeks turned into months, the scent of expensive perfumes was replaced by the stench of starvation. This wasn't just a battle. It was a psychological breakdown of a civilization. When the city finally surrendered, Thutmose didn't burn it. He realized Megiddo was too valuable to destroy. He turned it into his personal military fortress, the ultimate checkpoint for the next 300 years. Fast forward 500 years, and Megiddo undergoes its most radical transformation yet. Under the legendary King Solomon, the mound evolved into a high-tech military garrison. This is where the archaeology gets incredibly specific. Investigators found massive stable complexes, capable of housing nearly 500 war horses. Imagine the sensory shift. The smell of sacrificial blood from the great temple below was now buried under the pungent odor of hay, manure, and oiled leather. This was the Pentagon of the Iron Age. These weren't just stables, they were the hangars for the most advanced weapon of the era, the chariot. Megiddo became a chariot city, a place where the elite horse lords trained to dominate the plains. The stones here still bear the marks of tethering holes, where the most powerful animals in the Middle East once stood, ready to deploy at a moment's notice, to defend the borders of Israel. But a fortress is only as strong as its weakest link, water. In a siege, the first thing an enemy does is cut off the springs outside the walls. To solve this, the engineers of Megiddo performed a miracle of ancient technology. They dug a vertical shaft 120 feet deep, straight through the solid rock of the Tel, and then tunneled 230 feet horizontally to reach a hidden spring outside the city walls. They camouflaged the external entrance so perfectly that an army could stand right on top of it and never know they were walking over the city's lifeblood. This tunnel is a masterpiece of desperation and genius. Walking through it today, you can still see the pickaxe marks of the laborers who worked in near total darkness, knowing that if they failed, every man, woman, and child above would die of thirst. It is a reminder that in Armageddon, the greatest enemy isn't always the soldier at the gate. It's the environment itself. Every story of Armageddon needs a tragedy, and Megiddo delivered its most devastating blow in 609 BC. King Josiah was the great hope of the kingdom of Judah, a reformer, a warrior, and a man believed to be under divine protection.
Soldiers of Israel, with the law in one hand and the sword in the other, we march to victory!
When Pharaoh Necho II marched toward Megiddo, Josiah moved to intercept him. He believed that on this holy hill, God would not allow him to fail. He was wrong. An Egyptian arrow found the gap in his armor. The king was rushed from the field, dying shortly after. The shock was seismic. The chosen king had fallen at Megiddo. This trauma changed the Hebrew psyche forever. The mourning for Josiah at Megiddo became the biblical standard for ultimate grief. It was at this moment that Megiddo stopped being just a military fortress and started becoming a spiritual wound. The belief began to ferment. If the greatest king died here, then the great victory must also happen here to balance the scales of history. By the time the Iron Age collapsed, Megiddo had seen it all. It had been an Egyptian outpost, a Canaanite city-state, and an Israelite garrison. But as the empires of Babylon and Persia rose, the city itself began to fade into a ghost town. Yet its ghost was more powerful than its walls. The memory of the hill of Megiddo, Har Megiddo, stayed lodged in the collective mind of the region. It became the symbol of the great battlefield. It wasn't just a place anymore, it was a concept. When John of Patmos sat in his cave centuries later to write the book of Revelation, he didn't pick a random name for the final battle. He picked the place where he knew kings went to die. He picked the place that had already ended the world 20 times. He picked the name that would haunt humanity for the next 2 millennia. After the death of Josiah, the physical city of Megiddo began to crumble, but its psychological shadow only grew taller. As the centuries rolled by, the once mighty stone gates were reclaimed by the dust, and the chariot stables became silent tombs for the winds of the Jezreel Valley. By the time of the Roman Empire, the city was a ghost, a tell of ruins already ancient to the legions marching past. However, a new kind of power was brewing. In the 3rd century AD, one of the world's oldest Christian churches was built at the foot of the mound. Archaeologists discovered a stunning mosaic there, depicting fish and geometric patterns, symbols of a quiet faith growing in the shadow of a mountain of war. But this peaceful interlude was an anomaly. The site was no longer a place where men lived. It had become a place where men searched for the meaning of the end. Enter John of Patmos. Writing from a desolate cave on a Greek island, John composed the book of Revelation, the final, terrifying chapter of the Christian Bible. When he needed a name for the staging ground of the ultimate battle between good and evil, he didn't invent a fantasy land. He reached back into the blood-soaked history of the Levant. He took the Hebrew Har Megiddo and transliterated it into the Greek Armageddon. To his readers, this wasn't a mysterious code. It was a chilling reference to a place they knew as the Graveyard of Kings. By naming this specific hill, John wasn't just predicting a future war. He was summoning the ghosts of Thutmose, Josiah, and every soldier who had ever bled into that soil. He transformed a tactical choke point into a cosmic one, ensuring that as long as the Bible was read, Megiddo would never be forgotten. Modern archaeology at Megiddo is like performing an autopsy on a prophecy. When researchers first began digging in the early 20th century, they weren't just looking for potsherds, they were looking for the Pentagon of the Bible. What they found confirmed the site's militaristic obsession. They uncovered the great water system we discussed, but they also found evidence of the city's repeated violent transitions. Every time the archaeologists cleared a layer of debris, they found a destruction level, a thick band of ash and charred wood. It became clear that Armageddon wasn't a one-time event. It was a chronic condition. The mound itself is a physical record of human failure, 20 times over. Each layer of ash represents a world that ended in fire, only for the survivors to crawl back and rebuild on the ruins, unknowingly raising the stage for the next catastrophe. But even in a city defined by war, the human desire for beauty persists, creating a haunting contrast. The Megiddo ivories remain one of the most significant finds in the history of the Near East. These are intricate carvings, stylized animals, courtly scenes, and deities, carved from elephant tusks with a precision that seems impossible for the Bronze Age. Found in a palace treasury, they represent the extreme wealth that Megiddo's choke point generated. While blood was being spilled at the gates, the elite inside were surrounded by the finest art the ancient world could produce, much of it showing Egyptian and Hittite influence. This is the dark irony of the site. The very wealth that allowed for such artistic heights was the same wealth that made the city a target. The beauty of the ivories and the brutality of the battlefields are two sides of the same coin, a coin that Megiddo has been flipping for 6,000 years. As the Roman Empire consolidated its grip on Judea, Megiddo, now known as Legio, became the base for the Legio VI Ferrata, the ironclad 6th Legion. The Romans understood what every general before them knew. If you want to keep the province from exploding, you plant your iron boots on the Jezreel Valley. They built a massive military camp near the foot of the ancient Tel, turning the area into a hub of Roman administration and engineering. They laid down paved roads that followed the same paths Thutmose's chariots had carved a millennium earlier. The presence of the Roman military added another layer to the Armageddon myth. To the oppressed local population, the sight of Roman eagles glinting in the sun at Megiddo was a daily reminder that the final battle against their occupiers would likely happen right there, on the traditional soil of Israel's greatest tragedies. In 1918, during the First World War, history repeated itself with uncanny precision. General Edmund Allenby of the British Army faced the Ottoman Turks in the Jezreel Valley. Allenby, a student of history, studied the tactics of Thutmose III. He moved his cavalry through the same narrow passes, outflanking the enemy just as the pharaoh had done 3,000 years prior. His victory was so decisive that he was granted the title Viscount Allenby of Megiddo. This modern battle proved that the geography of the site hadn't changed, and neither had its strategic importance. It wasn't just a biblical story anymore. It was a lived reality of the 20th century. Megiddo had successfully bridged the gap from ancient myth to modern warfare, proving that the choke point of death was still open for business in the age of machine guns and airplanes. Today, Tel Megiddo is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a place where tourists walk among the ruins of stables and temples, taking selfies where kings once fell. But look past the gift shop and the gravel paths, and you'll see that the Jezreel Valley remains one of the most militarized zones on the planet. Just miles away sit some of Israel's most strategic air bases. The same sky that once saw Egyptian arrows now sees F-35 fighter jets. The geopolitical tension of the modern Middle East feels like a low-frequency hum vibrating through the ancient stones of the Tel. We are currently living in the longest period of peace Megiddo has ever known. But the archaeology tells us that this is likely just the interval between the 20th and 21st layers. The question isn't if another layer will be added, but what the archaeology of our layer will look like to those who dig it up 1,000 years from now. As we stand on the summit of the Tel today, looking out over the Jezreel Valley, we have to ask ourselves a chilling question. What will the next layer look like? If the history of Megiddo has taught us anything, it's that every end of the world is merely a construction project for the next. To a futuristic archaeologist, our current civilization at Megiddo won't be defined by temples or ivory, but by something far more permanent. They will find the silicon of our microchips, the reinforced concrete of our bunkers, and the twisted titanium of our aircraft. They will see a layer of plastic and steel that covers the globe, thinking we were the ones who finally broke the cycle. But beneath our feet, the 20 layers of ash are laughing. They remind us that every empire before us sat exactly where we are, convinced that their technology, their gods, and their walls were the ones that would finally last forever. Remember the anomaly I mentioned at the beginning of this journey, the secret pattern hidden in the stones. After decades of excavating these 20 layers, researchers noticed something that defies coincidence. Megiddo doesn't just fall to random violence. It falls at the exact moment of a technological phase shift. It fell when bronze replaced stone. It fell when iron replaced bronze. It fell when chariots replaced infantry. Megiddo is the world's ultimate laboratory of destruction. It is the place where humanity tests its newest ways to kill. The Armageddon isn't a single event waiting at the end of a calendar. It is a recurring biological urge. We are drawn back to this valley because its geography demands a winner and a loser. The pattern shows that we don't fight here because of prophecy. We fulfill the prophecy because we cannot stop refining the geometry of our own extinction. This brings us to the ultimate payoff of the Armageddon myth. For 2,000 years, the West has looked at this hill as a spiritual finish line. But look at the evidence. When John of Patmos wrote about the kings of the earth gathering at Armageddon, he was describing a geopolitical reality that had already been true for 3 millennia. The final battle is a metaphor for the moment humanity's destructive capacity finally exceeds the Earth's ability to absorb it. The end of days isn't a divine fire from the sky. It's the fire we've been building, layer by layer, since the first sheep was slaughtered in the Great Temple. Megiddo is the physical proof that we are trapped in a loop. We are the architects of our own apocalypse, and we've been practicing the choreography of the end times right here, on this specific coordinate, for 6,000 years. Today, the wind that sweeps across Tel Megiddo carries the scent of wild herbs and jet fuel from the nearby Ramat David Air Base. It is a surreal juxtaposition. You can stand in a 3,000-year-old chariot stall and watch a supersonic jet break the sound barrier overhead. The choke point of death is still active. The modern state of Israel, surrounded by regional rivals, knows that this valley remains the strategic heart of the Middle East. If a global conflict were to ignite today, the tactical maps would look almost identical to the ones Thutmose III drew on papyrus. The names of the weapons have changed, but the math of the valley remains the same. We are living in the 21st layer. We are the occupants of the summit, momentarily enjoying the view before the weight of history demands another sacrifice to the strata below. So, is the Armageddon coming? The archaeology of Megiddo gives us a devastating answer. It has already been here, it is here now, and it will be here again. Megiddo is not a warning about a future we can avoid. It is a mirror of a nature we cannot escape. It tells us that peace is merely the interval between layers of ash. As you look at the sunset over the Jezreel Valley, realize that you aren't looking at a historical ruin. You are looking at a countdown. The 20 layers of Megiddo are a silent record of every time we thought we were the masters of destiny, only to become the dust for the next generation to build upon. The Armageddon is the echo of our own footsteps, returning to the same ground, waiting for the signal to start again. The question isn't whether the end is near. The question is, what will we leave behind for the 22nd layer to find?